serving up 3 flavors of ice cream today for our set: strawberry, mint chip, and chocolate. Just by adding a couple of extra ingredients, we are going to elevate these flavors so that they look more realistic and they taste more realistic. Let's start with the strawberry ice cream. To give it a little bit more realistic flavor and look, I'm going to be adding freeze-dried fruit. I don't actually have freeze-dried strawberries, so we'll be using raspberries. And I'm starting with a base of pink royal icing. This is a thicker flood consistency. Add a few of your raspberries to the icing, and I'm just working these in. We'll cover this, set it aside, and work on our next flavor. Next up is chocolate. To get the flavor and look of the chocolate ice cream, I will be adding cocoa powder directly to my white royal icing base. A little goes a long way. That might be a little bit too much. Loosen it with water as needed. Okay, cover this one, set it aside. For our mint chip ice cream, we have a flood consistency royal icing base. I colored this with Americolor avocado food gel. And to this, I'm just adding some mini chocolate chips. In addition to the chocolate chips, I will be adding just a touch of this peppermint extract. Before we start decorating our ice cream scoop cookies, let's talk about cutting the dough. So for the scoop itself, I'm using my Painted Ladies Pastry Shabby Design cutter. This cutter is in 5-inch. I suggest 4, 5, or 6-inch for this, depending on your set size. If you go much smaller, the cookie will be very small because of how long and thin it is. For the scoops, I am using an actual ice cream scoop, and I just pick a scoop that fits nicely with the size of my cutter. Give it a light spray with some cooking oil. And then I have room temperature dough here. So I scooped my dough into my cutter, and I want to leave a little extra on top so that I have a natural looking lip when this comes out of the scoop. So I'm just pressing the scoop down onto my baking sheet to form that lip, and then releasing the scoop. So I'm releasing the dough. And you can see the scoop creates a nice texture on the top. That's even better. So it creates that nice ice cream scooped texture. Now I will freeze this and then put the frozen dough directly into the oven because I want to keep as much of the shape as possible. If it doesn't give you nice shape, you can always use a tool. This is a wood clay tool to give a little bit more definition and sculpt that dough before it goes into the oven. We are ready to flood our scooped ice cream cookies with the flavored royal icing that we just put together. So we'll start with the mint chip. This gets a little bit messy, so I decorate on something like a piece of parchment, something that I don't mind getting a little bit dirty. I'm using a paintbrush to apply the royal icing because I want a really thin layer. You may want to consider thinning this out with more water if needed. I don't want to lose this ridging in the cookie itself because that really gives it the characteristic of a scoop of ice cream. So taking my brush, I'm painting that royal icing on, working it into the grooves of the cookie. So this isn't going to be a thick layer of royal icing. And that's fine because it's a thick cookie, and just this thin layer itself, almost like a glaze, will help seal in moisture for the cookie and keep it nice and soft. Okay, let's move on to our next flavor. So this is our strawberry or raspberry flavored royal icing. And last but not least, we have our chocolate. These are now ready for their cookie scoops. The first step for decorating our ice cream scoop is to flood a white base layer on the scoop itself and then the mechanisms. I use a single consistency outline and flood. That's my preference. When I designed this shape, I left a little extra cookie here for some ice cream overflow that will be covered when we add the scoop of ice cream on top of this area here. So we'll let this dry, and then we'll be building up some layers with some thicker consistency royal icing, and we'll also be working on the handle. Before adding our second layer of royal icing, I want to give the scoop a little bit of a metallic dimensional look, and to do that I'm going to use my Sweet Sticks metallic palette. To activate the color, I just squeeze a little bit of water onto the palette. I let it sit on the paint so the paint starts to dissolve, and then I'll just mix it in with my brush. This palette is a favorite of mine because there's such a wide range of metallic color here from light to dark, so I can use that to paint dimension with the metallic and add lots of nice color variation and interest. I always start with the lighter color and build up to the darker. While we let that base layer of metallic dry, we will work on the handle. We're going to be sculpting the handle using that thicker toothpaste consistency icing, and I'm going to give this one a red handle. So I'm going to cut a pretty large hole in my Tipless bag. I'm not worried at this point too much about the details. I will add those in after the icing has set up for just a little bit. So my goal here is just to get the icing piped down onto the cookie. Again, at this stage, it doesn't have to look perfect. We will be pushing and sculpting it into place shortly. Okay, so we have the icing piped down. Now, when sculpting with royal icing, you want to let it set so that when you go in with your tools to move it and shape it, it doesn't stick to those tools. So for icing that is piped on here, it's a pretty thick layer of that thicker consistency royal icing that I piped down. So I'll let this set on the cookie for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then I will check it with my tool to see if it's sticky. If it's still sticky, I'll let it sit for a minute or two longer. It's been sitting for about 1.5 minutes. I have my wood clay tool here. This is my tool of choice for sculpting the royal icing. And it looks like it's set up for me pretty nicely. So you can see none of the icing is coming off on my tool. I'm able to pat and move this icing into shape, so we've reached a good consistency. If your icing has crusted over and you're getting that crusty look when you try to manipulate it, you either have too thick of icing or you've let it sit for too long. Pushing that icing all the way out to the edge and then just using my tool to clean up any excess. So I think this looks good. You can see the edges are a little messy, so you can take a pin blade, or this is just a palette knife, just to pay attention to the edges if you like. Make sure those are smooth. For the white toothpaste consistency royal icing, we need a slightly smaller hole than I cut for the handle color. And for my white details, I will be painting these metallic. I'm just touching down my piping bag and pulling a consistent, kind of thick line down the center, running from the scoop to the handle. I pulled it down a little bit too far because I want to add a support running horizontally. We can shape that into place. And then a rim around the scoop itself. Ready now to just take the flat edge of our tool and gently flatten the piped icing around the scoop. The goal is just to create a little bit of a rim and some dimension. Okay, the last little pipe detail is going to be this little lever here. Our thicker consistency icing details have dried, and we are ready to add the final layer of metallic paint. I like to finish off almost all of my painted cookies with a little bit of white to highlight. So I'm using Elite Color by the Sugar Art in white. This is water activated as well. I'm gonna finish this with a little bit of Poppy Paint Super Shine. I had a little bit of extra dough left over, so I hand cut this shape here to look like a melted puddle of ice cream, and we are going to partner that with one of these scoops. We'll decorate them separately by using some of that leftover icing and just flood that onto the cookie. We will let these two dry, and then eventually when they're dry, this will fit right on top.